Everyone always wants to talk about their favorite Legend of Zelda dungeons, but there's some really bad dungeons over the entire series, and we're here today to have a couple of drinks of beer and give those dungeons their proper ripping.
And a lot of things go into these dungeons appearing on this list. One of them is just confusing, crushing difficulty.
Definitely.
Nothing's worse than wandering around a dungeon for hours trying to find a key you forgot about.
Now, I don't have that challenge of like getting lost in dungeons or anything.
Right.
I pretty much just like blaze right through them. But I can understand how other people kind of have that feeling.
And then a lot of these dungeons are just really boring, whether it's like dull colors, dull enemies, just uninspiring.
I was completely joking too, by the way.
Well,
I think most people, if you watch our videos, you know I was completely joking.
Trust me,
that
they probably saw me rolling my eyes when you were saying that.
That's true. I didn't see you rolling your eyes, but also like these dungeons, they just have like really crappy themes. I mean, sometimes they're just like really low. They just sound horrible, and then sometimes they're like almost non-existent.
You add all those things together, and that's how you get a dungeon that appears on this list.
Yes, and this is our top 8 worst Zelda dungeons.
Let's go to the ranking.
Red, I like my dungeons how I like my women, and that is not pink walls that smell like fish. I mean, just right off the bat, this place, like, it's not colorful at all. The color just looks horrible. The theme is just awful. It's basically non-existent.
And at the end of the day, you're inside a fish. I mean, it's disgusting. The walls are moving and everything. And worst of all, you're carrying this stupid spoiled princess around the whole time.
And this fish, it sounds like he's digesting something.
I know.
Like he's having indigestion, I guess is what I was trying to say, but
oh, I hate that mini boss fight too. He always gives me fits.
He can be tough. Just the concept of being a fish, I just really felt like it was a dumb idea.
And the concept of anytime you lose Rudo, you have to go back and find her where you found her, or where you originally found her.
Now, the one good thing about this dungeon, I guess, was the boomerang. I kind of did like how that was used.
It's not enough to bail it out.
Yeah, well, definitely not. That's why it's on this listing. But like in the boss right here, he wasn't too bad, but still, like, I mean, just look where
just looking for silver linings.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought the idea of moving rooms around in a dungeon seemed like a cool concept, but man, did it get old fast.
Very confusing. I'm honestly still trying to figure out the puzzle. I mean, I spent so much time there.
And then on top of that, I feel like it was just recycling kind of the same themes and concepts from previous dungeons.
Which I didn't mind so much, but I don't think you gotta spend enough time in exploring the areas enough from the past areas.
I'll tell you what, the areas we did spend too much time in, though, was the fire areas.
Man, like one of those platforms, it just took forever in this dungeon.
And it took away from spending times in the dungeons we really liked.
Yes,
things like Ancient Cistern.
Well, how about the Ancient Cistern, though? Like, we didn't even get the upstairs beautiful part. They only gave us the downstairs part, which was just incredibly frustrating.
It was. And then just to throw it on top of that, we don't get an item in this dungeon.
No, or a boss. We don't have a boss at all.
Or a boss fight at all. And then just to kind of cap it all off, when we do get the pieces of the Triforce, it feels so anticlimactic.
Yeah, I was just expecting like a lot more, maybe a cutscene, and there was just nothing at all. You build me up with Ocarina of Time, and you give me this crap right here. And then one of the very first things that stands out is the dungeon theme and how much worse it is than the original.
Well, and on top of that, this dungeon just suffers from what we like to call first dungeon of the game syndrome, where it's just bland, boring, not that much fun.
And these monkeys were so annoying. I mean, you didn't catch like only 2 or 3 of them. I mean, it almost ended up being like 10 monkeys that you had to catch.
And then on top of those, like the mini boss you fight, the gorilla thing, it's goofy.
Yeah, silly, goofy. Exactly, I agree with you. And the place is just kind of dark. I mean, yeah, it kind of has like a force field, obviously, but it's just too dark in my opinion.
And I was not a big fan of how you had to keep using the Gale Boomerang to spin these platforms over and over.
Very tedious. Now this boss right here, like, first of all, like, where's this purple swamp come from?
Looks like it belongs in Majora's Mask.
And then also, like, the waterfalls. Like, where is the source of the waterfalls here?
And then the boss himself, just not that fun of a boss. Just,
I mean, it's a plant. It's a plant boss.
Yeah.
I mean, ugh, you know, who cares?
It's not a good dungeon. One of my all-time favorite Zelda moments was entering the Dark World for the first time in A Link to the Past, and then they throw this horrible dungeon at you.
And going with the name, a lot of the reason we hate this place was the dark rooms and just how hard it was to navigate them and also fight enemies in them.
Speaking of navigating, I mean, this whole dungeon was fairly difficult to navigate in our opinion.
Yeah, it took a long time too, really.
It did, and then on top of that, it was just so bland.
What are you talking about? This place is beautiful, man. I mean, you got these awesome gray walls, you got these black rooms. I mean, like the Swamp Palace, you had water.
Yeah.
The Ice Palace had ice. What's this place offering?
And then the hammer they give you to fight these helmeted and armored enemies just seems so underwhelming, especially compared to some of the later hammers you get.
It's a lot better for like the overworld than it really was in this dungeon.
It was, and fighting these armored enemies was
those turtles. I actually hate those turtles. I still hate them to this day. Now, this boss right here, and one example of why we don't like the item, we don't even have to use it on this guy. You can actually use bombs on him, but to be honest with you, I did not mind this boss that much. I mean, Zelda games are already hard enough, and then you like let us be able to slip and slide everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there was just so much ice, obviously going with the name, that it just made it a very difficult dungeon.
It was, and when you combine the ice with things like blade traps and flames and narrow walkways and these enemies you just can't dodge, it's such a pain.
And not to mention how confusing this place was. Like, first of all, there was like a lot of backtracking.
Oh my gosh.
But then you basically have to do like a whole full circle, and you have to almost get it completely right.
And then on top of that, the dungeon...
That walkway right there. That's one reason I hate this place.
What I say about flames and narrow walkways right there. But the dungeon...
the spikes. Sorry for interrupting, but the spikes too. I mean, there was just so many different obstacles.
But that tunic is just kind of a dull item to get in what's a really tough dungeon.
It's an item that you should get from like a fairy fountain or like in the overworld, not in a dungeon.
And then having to fight the eyeball boss for the second or third time in this game, I thought was a bit of a letdown too. After, again...
It was reused too many times.
It really was. It really was. Now you had to know this one was going to be on the list.
Oh, definitely.
This is probably the most universally reviled Zelda dungeon out there.
I'll tell you the first thing that comes to my mind that I hated was equipping the iron boots. Was equipping the iron boots. Was equipping the iron boots. Was equipping the iron boots.
Then once you get past that, raising the water level, lower the water level.
That song, yes, exactly. And then, like, obviously, it was so confusing. It's probably one of the hardest dungeons in any Zelda game.
Well, it was so easy to miss the keys.
Oh, the hole in the middle pillar and the cracked wall. Oh, I hated those.
And I thought the mini boss fight, you're fighting Dark Link. There should have been a build up to it. It should have been exciting, but he
was hard the first time though. We didn't know how to beat him. And then, like, the item that we got right there is just an upgrade.
Yeah.
The vortexes we saw in that room, those you could be swimming there for hours and get nowhere basically.
And then to top it all off, after this horrible, hard dungeon, it's a terrible boss at the end.
Disappointing boss.
Just very easy, no challenge.
It was not good enough reward for the dungeon that we had to go through.
Agreed.
In a game that was so colorful, I mean, Red, just take a look at this place. It's just got these dull blue walls, and it's just represented throughout the entire dungeon.
Speaking of dull, I mean, this game had some of the best music in any Zelda game, and then, where's the theme in this?
You can barely even hear it at all. And then, I'm not a big fan of like the spooky and eerie dungeons like Shadow Temple, and this place obviously was exactly like that.
You know what I'm not a big fan of? Escorting medley around the whole dungeon.
It takes you back to Jabu Jabu and Princess Rudo.
Oh, and then having to play the command melody the whole time.
What, 1,000 times? Or was it a million?
I think it was a million.
Yeah, gosh, it was just so annoying.
And then like moving these mirrors around and even using the mirror shield in general.
It just didn't make sense as an item. Now the boss right here, I actually didn't mind this boss that much, but he's just a little bit too much. He's too jolly and really didn't fit the dungeon.
He seemed a little too goofy for what's an otherwise horrible, dark, dull dungeon. Just terrible. Do we really have to talk about this dungeon?
We don't have enough beers to finish off this place. It's only a minute long, too.
Where to begin with what we hate from this dungeon? I mean, just the gray, boring, uninspired walls is a good place to start.
And I thought the theme was one of the weakest in any Zelda games, barely non-existent. You can barely even hear it.
We spend the entire first half of the dungeon running from or stunning this stupid Zanthand. It's like being chased by walnuts.
I really thought the first two parts were just unnecessary. Like before you get to the palace, that doesn't even look like a palace in the center.
It's a hideous palace.
And this is where the royal family stays, so whatever.
And they keep recycling like some of these dark Twilight enemies that we just hated.
Yeah, throughout the entire game. I mean, I hated them throughout the entire game.
Then we finally meet Zant, and he takes off his helmet and starts talking, and he looks
like a wussy.
Oh, it's
looks like a wussy.
And then, like, they recycle these phases from previous boss fights. Would they leave out our favorite ones?
Yeah, they leave out which one's Argle Rock, and then the best one ever in any Zelda game, it's non-debatable, the Star-Lord boss fight. So, you could use some better ones.
You add all that up, and this is our least favorite Zelda dungeon to date.
And here are individual rankings, and you'll notice right off the bat that we actually only have 7 dungeons listed, but this was a top 8 worst Zelda dungeons. And the reason for that being is, like, you can see we're very similar right here, but actually 5 we both had that the other didn't have, and so we just decided to put both of those dungeons on this listing.
And you'll notice we didn't really have anything from The Legend of Zelda or Zelda 2. I mean, those were really, really difficult dungeons.
They were.
And
we didn't hate them. We didn't hate them, though.
We didn't hate them, and they were also so similar, it felt like if we put, like, one of them on there, I mean, how do you differentiate? We'd have to put them all on.
Yeah, I agree. And you also might be asking yourself, why did y'all not do a top 10? You know, why did you only do a top 8? When we got to a certain point, we really didn't hate the dungeons anymore.
No, not at all.
We just didn't like them as much as the other ones, so we wanted this to be a ranking of dungeons that we kind of hated.
Be sure to subscribe to our channel by clicking on the red subscribe button. It'll send you to our YouTube page where you'll see that we post Zelda videos weekly.
And give us a follow on Twitter where we talk about Zelda-related topics every single day.
And if you click on the video on the left, you'll be sent to Hick's Top 10 Zelda Dungeons, where the video on the right will send you to our Top 10 Zelda Bosses.
Or click at the bottom to be sent to a playlist of all our ranking videos.